Welcome to the Hired by Passion podcast. I'm your host, Marcel, and I will be interviewing artists and entrepreneurs on how they were able to escape the 9-to-5 and turn their passion into an income. Hello, and thanks for choosing to listen to the Hired by Passion podcast. My guest today worked in film, TV, and is a much sought-after MC. Often known as Lucien, I'm glad to have today Marcel Button. In this episode, Marcel tells us about how he chose to become a professional, and the difference between being a professional and doing it for fun. We also talk about the importance of creating your own work and learning to deal with rejection. Without any further ado, here is Marcel Button. So Marcel, thank you for agreeing to chat with me. Are you ready to get this started?
Absolutely. Great to be part of this.
You've had a good career looking back, but if you look at everything you did in the past year and you had to sum it up in a minute or two, who would you say is Marcel Button?
Well, he's somebody that has managed to make the most of what little talent he was born with. I do sing in the shower, and that's about it. I'm not someone who you would love to hear perhaps try to render a ballad. I can dance okay, but I've never really been paid to do so. I guess my gift, I suppose, was born with is the ability to listen and witness what goes on around me and then write. I think the key to any endeavor, whether it be comedy, whether it be journalism, any type of career that involves changing the way people see themselves and the world around them, has to do with the ability to, in some form or other, write it down. And if you're a choreographer, you sketch it out. If you're a set designer, you use computer programming now, but you sort of have this vision where you imagine something, and in my case, it started with pen and paper, and of course now I've graduated to a keyboard and a computer, and in some cases I can now dictate things that turn magically into script. But it's like the field of stand-up comedy that you're in. I mean, people think, oh, you're just up there and these things are just coming into your head as you're standing on stage. They can be very naive about the fact that you perhaps spent a lot of time torturing yourself about, whether I should say she went all the way or she went for broke, or however you may want to structure a word or a line or something like that. So I think that's been the strength for me. I guess one of the pivotal moments for me in making a career of what it is that I do happened many, many years ago when I was in university, and I had an acting teacher who was a professional actor, and just decided on a lark that he would come and teach for a year. But he was someone who lived in the professional world, not the academic one, and said to me, darling, you must make a decision if you want to become a professional actor that you will. Professional means you get paid, so you should never do anything for nothing, and be prepared to say no if you have to. But it can be anything from, maybe a bottle of scotch or tickets to another event. But as long as there's an exchange, it says to you primarily, and you're the most important person, but to everyone else, that there's a value associated with you, the professional artist, and therefore you become a product. And I mean, to give an analogy, I don't expect, if I have a major jam in my sink or my toilet is broken and I call someone to do that, I'm not going to look in the yellow pages under plumber and say, pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I've got a job for you. I'm wondering if you are looking for exposure, if you'd like to really hone your craft. Would you mind coming and doing it for free? By the same token, that plumber someday might attend a major conference in Moncton or Las Vegas or Toronto. If he does really well, he's been invited to go meet all the other plumbers to figure out, see what kind of unclogging discussion they can have. And while they're there, who knows, one night there might be an entertainment after their banquet, which I, by the way, have done shows for a group of plumbers. That's why I bring that up. But they see me or somebody like me performing a character or a bit of comedy, and the fees that they paid for that conference and the money that was raised to put on that event, some of that goes to pay that artist. And so there is that exchange, that it is it ends up being a trade, a métier, a skill that has a value to it.
Definitely. And if I can just interrupt you there, the whole thing is I find once you get to that level, when you're in front of, a conference, in front of all these plumbers, it's easy to see that there's value and that you should demand compensation for your performance there. But I find that in any artistic field, it seems to be expected, and I know it's wrongly expected, but then it's because people are doing it. They are performing for free, or they're trying to do it for experience, because it is important in any artistic field to get a lot of, especially the performing arts, to get experience and to get stage time and all that people are willing to do it for free. But can you realistically today start and say, I want to get paid from day one?
Depends on what kind of formation training you've had and your skills, talents, and abilities. But certainly, I'm not in this discussion in any way trying to downgrade or knock people who do this for fun. I think they are what makes the world go round. I think the fact is, like for me, I've been primarily a professional actor, writer. The fact that I can go see an amateur production, which I did a month ago at a theater here not far from the capital, group, for example, Harry T's. They do these comedies. They do them really well. And in the cast is someone who is a full-time teacher. There's somebody else who works at for the city of Moncton, works for the library, perhaps. People from all walks of life. There's retired people. And the fact that I am doing something that I can get paid for, that most of the people who do it or would happily do it for free, is a gift. And I don't overlook that. But what I'm saying is, once you get to a stage that you have the three things, I guess: confidence, certainly talent, ability, and three, the work ethic to be able to do so, then you, as we say, cast your stone in that water and you enter that field. And you know what I have had in the past is, when I was starting my career, people approach me and say, would you like to be in this play we're doing? And I've got the details of it. And it was a group of amateur performers. And I declined. I said no. And I ended up having to create my own company and make my own work, because other than in those years, I was living in Fredericton, and I did a couple of shows with an organization called Theatre New Brunswick, who are professional and paid me, but there wasn't a lot else going on. So I had to become an entrepreneur to be able to pursue my goal of doing this professionally.
So was it a hard decision to refuse that work that, is in the field and in the experience that you want to gain? Did you have any hesitations to say no, that you were thinking maybe this could be a break for you or anything of that sort?
Well, a little bit, but I guess I just decided that I needed to get paid for that, and I had already been paid for that, and that I would rather, if I needed money, go wait tables somewhere or sell Avon products door to door, or do something else that had another thing associated with it, to be able to earn an income, rather than devalue what it was that I, in particular, decided was going to be a professional endeavor. And that, it's just really comes down to deciding who you want to be. And it may sound a bit snobby at times. And, there is a risk I'll never work again. But if this is how I want to be identified and how I want to work, then all of a sudden you create a market for yourself, if you follow me. I have a very good friend who I've done now 3 shows with in the last 5 years. And he was working in radio and, in other forms of business, named Sandy Gillis. And he has a similar character like I have. It's called Jimmy the Janitor. So Jimmy and Lucien, my character, have done 3 or 4 shows together. When I first moved back to New Brunswick in the mid-90s, he was doing these little gigs here and there, and he was still working, full-time in radio. He would do a gig for $100 a night, so he was getting paid. When I moved in and people called me up and said, would you like to do your show somewhere? And then all of a sudden I said, sure, but it's at the time, I don't know, I was getting, I think, between $1,500 and $2,000 a night. So you would think that would be bad. But what happened was, for someone like Sandy, it created an expectation in the corporate world, and I'm talking about gigs that you would do for the Chamber of Commerce, for the, people who have a budget for these things. I learned years ago, when you were trying to raise money to do a show and you go see a corporation, could you sponsor me? They may not have money to sponsor, but when they're putting on their event, when there's a group of plumbers or electricians or academics academics, or the book I'm going to write is called "There's an Association for Everything." These people have these meetings, and I'm doing one in a week's time for Banque Nationale. They get together in groups and so what happened with Sandy was it all of a sudden made his value that much better. It's like all of a sudden there's this other guy who is getting $1,500 or $2,000. We were getting $100. Then he could start charging more. And then, now we're pretty much, Sandy's pretty savvy businessman. So he always prices himself at about $500 to $1,000 less than I do. But he learned, like, it was good for him. It was good for everybody, because I just came in and said, no, this is what this is worth. And all of a sudden people go, they laugh, they see a value in getting together and laughing. And someone put a price on it that instead of it destroying me, it made the other guy who did a similar thing benefit from that. So, it's like, that's the beauty of capitalism. As George Carlin said, you nail together two things that have never been nailed together before, put it under a spotlight, some schmuck will buy it. In other words, you never know until you put something out there what the value will be, but do not devalue yourself.
So how do you realize the amount of value that yourself can bring? How do you put a price tag on what you're doing?
Well, it comes down to the interview that was done after the very first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve. The actor Marlon Brando was hired, and Marlon Brando, of course, is one of the greatest actors of the 20th century in American cinema. But he was going to be on screen for 11 or 12 minutes, I believe. And he was paid the most amount of money that an actor had ever received for any role in the film. And this is back in the 70s. So you're talking about $2.5 million, which doesn't seem a lot by today's standards, but it was a scandalous amount of money. And so he was being interviewed after the movie was released, and the interviewer, who I forget, was taking the approach like, how can you possibly justify getting $2.5 million when you were on screen for 11 or 12 minutes? And Brando just paused and he said, well, it seemed to be the going rate. So you never really know until someone is willing to pay it. And of course, if you were Marshall Button or Marcel Richard and you said it's $1 million, well, you probably would never work. But guess what? All you need is one gig, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then all of a sudden, if it, it's sort of like water seeking its level. I think every act has its price point, and we deal with it here. I work at the Capitol Theater, and we book shows all the time, and we make considerations. Is it worth booking this act that only costs us $1,500, or should we look at this other one, which is going to be $20,000 US, which is a way big of a risk? But so the notion is, would you rather, it's the philosophy, would you rather lose $1,500 or make $1,500 on a show that cost you $20,000? And you tend to make money really on the big shows. So yeah, I mean, I'm now sitting in the green room of the Capitol, and I'm looking up and I see everything from the amazing Kreskin to Feist to Stompin' Tom Connors to all the various acts who've come through, Stuart McLean. And I could instantly, because of my years in show business, put a price on what it would cost for that artist, what you would sell a ticket for in an 800-seat room, and what the likelihood of making money. It's really interesting, too, because there's a lot of acts that are very well known, are popular because they've been on television mostly, but don't necessarily sell tickets. And there are other ones that may not be as much in the limelight, but for whatever reason, people know that they associate with a past experience or heard for someone else that you can sell a lot of tickets for. It's a very strange business.
So if we come back to you and you look at your past, let's say when you were younger, did you always know that you wanted to be in the entertainment field, or how did that happen?
Yeah, pretty much. I didn't know really there was such a thing as a professional actor. A little bit. I mean, we had one television station, and when the news or a hockey game wasn't on, there'd be like Forest Rangers and I Love Lucy and a couple of things. There wasn't a lot of context for that. I mean, then this theater in New Brunswick would come to town once in a while with professional shows, and we'd have the odd thing at school, not very much, but there wasn't much of a context for that. But I was a very, very shy, withdrawn person growing up, except when I got up in front of people and adopted a character, or would be in a room full of relatives even, and I would be quiet, but once in a while I would do something a little bit goofy, and I could lose my shyness in the acting up or becoming a different character or person. And that led others, like people who knew me as a kid, said, "Oh, we always knew you were going to be an actor," because that's kind of who you were growing up. But I had two things. One of them was I had a really good drama teacher who was very involved and put on these plays, and I would, tend to get the lead role and excelled at that. So it made me want to go to university and study it. I had that. But I also had parents who, my mom was a teacher and my dad worked in a paper mill. And especially my dad, who, I could have worked in a paper mill because the show I do and the character I do is based on a guy who works in that paper mill. And I used to work there as a young man. But when I decided I wanted to do this, my father was extremely encouraging, which you don't hear that often, because a lot of people will say, "Oh yeah, my parents said they're crazy." And I mean, even as recently as about 3 years ago, a very good family friend, they had a daughter who, perhaps now is 22, something like that. She was going to university, but she graduated from high school and she wanted to go and study theater. And the mother gets in touch with me and says, "I don't know, she wants to go do this. Can you talk some sense in her?" As if she wanted me to be able to talk her out of it. And I just said, "No, I'm not going to do that." I said, "This is what I do. And I if this is her passion." So it still is a very common thing for parents of kids to say, "You're crazy to try to do this." But it wasn't my case. I mean, my mother kind of knew I was good at that and said, "Well, you should go get your teaching degree in case this doesn't work." But I also knew that if I did that, I'd be putting too much energy into a teaching degree where I should be focused on really what I wanted to be doing, which was this.
Well, that definitely is a hard decision for a lot of people, because everybody kind of knows the odds. Like, what are the odds of someone making a living in the entertainment field? It feels slim. I don't know, like you've lived it, but as an outsider, it really does seem like a hard business to get into, and that a lot of people will not be able to do it professionally, but maybe having that attitude to start is what is stopping them. I don't know. What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think you could become your own worst enemy. I think you say yes to the thing that comes your way, and you figure it out later on. I think is perhaps an important place to start, and then eventually you can say no to things. But you also have to learn to. I figured out early on that it was important for me to learn the technical side. So I know a lot about lighting. I know a lot about stage construction. And because of my work as a professional actor, director, I can do wiring in my own house because I've worked so much on the technical side in my early years. So you do that. You get together with people and you form a co-op. We might only make $10 when it's all done, but hey, it's $10, and yes, that means we got paid. We're professional. You find ways to make it work. But yes, there are a number of obstacles. I can't say exactly what the percentage is, but there are lots of things to be done if you want to work in comedy, film, television, theater, entertainment. It's like that old joke where this old man was celebrating his 50 years in show business, and for all of the 50 years, his job was he was in like a vaudeville act where there was the horse that came on stage, and the thing he'd always done was he was the rear end of the horse. So the guy's interviewing him and said, "Okay, all your years in show business, it's really, I want to congratulate you, but you've been all this time, you've been the arse, the horse's arse kind of thing. Did you ever maybe think about doing something else?" And there was a slight pause, and the guy says, "What? And give up show business?" So that's show business. I mean, if you really want to do it, and you have a big wiener, you could become a porn star, I suppose. Yeah. And every once in a while, I would get a little discouraged, like everybody does in this career, because the one thing you must learn to do more than anything is to be able to nuance and deal with rejection, because that comes more than anything else, even for the top people in the world. You hear them say, "Oh, I should have been, I wanted to get this film," and they cast somebody else. And it's, it could be a Leonardo DiCaprio, who we all think is such a great actor, but he's been disappointed and thought maybe he should be playing the role that Brad Pitt played or whatever. Right? There's always a level of disappointment in show business, but, you cope with that by once in a while, I think I've been twice in my life. You go watch a stripper and you think, well, it could be worse. I could be doing that. And it's show business too. Like that's these poor gals, what they're doing up there. They're putting on a show and earning their money, and earning in some cases very good money. But I go watch that and I think, geez, if I were born with her body, or if I was born a woman and I really wanted to be in show business, I suppose I could be doing this. So the fact that the play that I'm in hasn't sold as many tickets as I hoped for is not as disastrous as it could be. But, in other words, you're in the business, and that's the point of the joke and the point of doing a stripper analogy. You're in the game, and, it could be I'm the guy that rips the tickets, or I'm selling it. You get in the business of show, and you figure it out from there.
So was there a point in your career where you really felt like it might just be easier to go out and get a job than to continually face that rejection?
Yeah, a couple of times. But my thing is I would have never done a thing had I not spent most of my time creating my own work. And by that, I have a job here at the Capitol. I don't know if it's a job. It's I'm working in the theater school. So I work where kids will study acting. So I work with that a little bit. And then I'm here and I do a big show last year during a comedy festival with a classical orchestra. So I've never done this in my life. And it's a big, the show is quite a success. And now it turns we're going to tour it around New Brunswick. We have a meeting this week about that. So that happened. But in the meantime, I got this great working relationship with this maestro, this conductor. He's fabulous. And so he says to me, what about doing a big musical? And I go, yeah. And so we talk about it a little bit, and then I come to the people here at the Capitol and say, we have an idea. We want to do The Sound of Music. Does the Capitol Theatre want to be a producer in this? So we come up with a project that involves 40 plus people. Everybody's getting paid. And by everybody, I mean the kid who's 10 years old, who goes to a École Champlain school, who's in the cast, is going to get paid to be in the show. That's the approach we took. And we have a budget where this one show, which is going to run, 6 performances, is costing as much budget-wise as our entire present season at the Capitol. I was able to sell it to the powers that be, find a partnership with the New Brunswick Youth Orchestra. We go out, we raise money, and here it is 5.5 weeks before the show opens, and we've already sold enough tickets that we're in a profit for it. I get paid my fee, everybody gets paid, and everything from here on in is going to be a profit for the Capitol, who took the risk, and the New Brunswick Youth Orchestra, who took the other half of the risk. But it didn't come from waiting around for someone else to call me to say, would you like to come here to direct a show? I had to be the organizer of the event. So that's a big part of it.
But going back to when you were younger, with less experience, with no connections, and you moved back to New Brunswick you did your studies in Quebec, and I know you spent some time in Toronto, but to come back to New Brunswick with not a whole lot of connections, not a whole lot of experience building your own shows, how did you motivate yourself day in and day out to create material for yourself?
Well, I guess it came from being a family man and having a dependence and the great sense that we needed a place to live. We should have a vehicle to drive. It would be nice to go on a vacation once in a while. It'd be great for the kids to be involved with activities that they'd like to do that may cost money. So to me, there's no great motivator than the sense that we would like to enjoy a certain lifestyle. And what does that take? What kind of effort does it take to make sure that everybody is provided for? And it's a wonderful motivator for me. And I'm essentially in spite of what you may have heard about my last story, I'm pretty lazy. Like I wouldn't do anything if I didn't have to. And for me, having to means I need to, I'm pretending I'm living in Thailand where if I don't work, I die. I mean, it's not the case. We all know you could be in Canada and live quite comfortably and just enjoy the great social, network that our country provides. However, I'm motivated more by the, not so much the limelight, but the realities of earning a living in my chosen profession.
Well, especially out here, that's what I find is hard. Is out here, I find a lot of people have to create their own opportunities, and that comes in a difficult way because you don't really know how to create these opportunities for yourself either. Because you see some people doing it, but how do you adapt that to yourself, and how do you find gigs where you feel it might be limited and a few people have the monopoly on the whole industry? So how do you make a mark for yourself when you're starting out?
Yeah, I guess for me, a big thing was getting back to where we started. As a writer, being able to create. I've been writing different things all my life and all kinds of shows, and sometimes they play one time and sometimes they play two times. But the big thing was about 32 years ago, I took about 5 minutes and wrote down this little 2-minute monologue based on a few of the guys I worked in the mill with and gave them a name. And then I wrote a show for New Brunswick in 1984 that had different scenes about New Brunswick and different parts of New Brunswick, but then performed this character as part of that. And then there was so much interest in the character that I was encouraged to do a one-man show, and I did it. And then now I've got 4 or 5, or the ones I've done with other people, perhaps 6 or 7 shows based on this one character. And strangely, I still can't figure it out. I don't believe I've ever gone more than 1 month without performing that character in some way, somewhere. And it's okay. Like, people could look at it and say, "What are you doing? You're just doing the same thing over and over again." But getting back to this thing, if somebody calls you and say, "How would you like I got a call about 4 months ago about a gig in September of 2016. So about a year in advance. He said, "Would you like to come to Yukon and be with us for 4 days, help be part of host our conference and, perform your character for us?" And you go, "Yeah, I suppose I could do that. You're going to fly me out there, going to pay me about $5,000 for my 4 or 5 days work. And then I get a chance to tour around Yukon. And guess what? Because I've got a flight out there, now I'm going to get in touch with the art centers and the people who do, maybe some of the comedy people, maybe some of the people who present shows in places like Whitehorse and Dawson City, and I may get a few extra gigs out of it." And so, yeah, I'm doing the same character, but guess what? It's gotten me right for, I've been, everywhere from Prince George, BC to Kabul in Afghanistan. So you don't look the gift horse in the mouth, as the expression goes.
Definitely. And did you ever feel like when you created Lucien, did you ever have a moment like, wow, this is actually going to work out? Or before you created Lucien, were you feeling you were struggling? And was there a kind of aha moment like, okay, this is going to work out?
The moment really was the opening night of when I first did it as a full-length show in Fredericton in March of 2006. And the theater was trying to do this series of shows in a second stage. They were doing it on the St. Thomas University campus. So it was a theater that seated about 250 people. And usually all the other shows in there would sell about 30, 40 tickets. Well, the show was sold out, and it was sold out for the whole week. And also the night of the opening of the show, it had such an amazing response from the audience that it lasted about 2 hours and 15 minutes. But I walked off stage and it could have been 2 minutes to me. I had no sense of time at all. And I just sort of lost myself in the moment in that whole exchange with an audience. And I guess that was a moment to me that said, I'm onto something here. I never try to analyze it too much, but this sort of expression of I, thou, or, being one with somebody, or, it's been expressed many different ways. But in my case, it was just this tremendous bonding with a full house that has lasted really, really well. And it's interesting because it's how I do most of my work, but it's the thing I work the least on in terms of trying to getting gigs or getting engagements, right?
But that's kind of interesting how you mentioned 2006, and if my timeline is correct, that's almost 20 years after that character was created.
Yeah.
So it still takes a lot of work and time into developing that character where you finally felt that, okay, this is going to work.
No, I'm sorry.
Out, right?
It was 1986 that I felt the moment.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it was that was the very first time I did it as a one-man show. And I guess, you have little, like people say, milestones. And I never really look at things. To me, the major, people say, oh, the day I got married or when I graduated from high school. Milestones for me are smaller. I spend so much time driving around the country. I've driven myself pretty much across Canada doing this and other shows. But a milestone for me is 11 o'clock at night and I'm traveling on a remote highway in Ontario in the wintertime and a transport is coming towards me And I just say to myself, if I can somehow stay on my side of the road and get past so this truck doesn't collide with me, and I can get just down that road a little bit further, to me, that's a major milestone. And it really is like that with show business too. It's just the kind of day-to-day, get out of bed, have your to-do list, try to spend a little bit of time being creative, a little bit of time being entrepreneurial, and hope the two will meet in some happy way that you are able to get through your year. Like I always, again, we started with this talking about the month of January. I have started each of the last 10, 15 years, with this bit soul searching always, because it's a new year. So it's a new start. And you think, how the hell am I going to make a living this year? And then things happen, I get these kind of calls to go to Yukon, and then I get an idea or talk to someone else and say, let's try this. Or then something like the East Coast Music Awards comes to town, and you get a call out of the blue and say, would you like to write the script for the award show? And even though I never did that before, I say, yeah, sure. I don't say I can't or don't do that. I just say yes and then figure it out later. So, it's just a kind of little milestones along the way. And sometimes, I can think to a show I did one time for a group of 7 people at a fishing lodge in the middle of New Brunswick, where the reaction that I had from them for the time I spent with them was as strong and impactful to me as, one night when I played to 1,000 people in a theater in St. John. It's just making the most of those little magic moments that you share. And I mean, you as a performer will know that when things really click, they click, and don't worry about the fact that nobody was in the middle of the woods except those 7 people and you, and don't worry about the fact that you're not on Broadway, or you're not in Toronto, or you're not in Montreal, that you're here at this moment, but you're doing the thing that you feel you have made it your life's goal to do, and you're doing it really well, and those people think you're doing it well, and they feel that they've gotten their value for what they paid you to be there, and you've had a good time with them.
As a self-proclaimed lazy person, did you find it hard to write this? You had a goal to do this, but was it hard to motivate yourself day in and day out to write the material to write these 5 plays that you wrote for Lucien?
Yeah, all of those plays were written after I already had a confirmed gig. So that's what I mean by lazy. I've never been good at writing plays and bits just on spec. I mean, I do a lot of stuff for CBC. They, sometimes they call me, sometime if it's, elections, or every year at the end of the year, I do a wrap up for them. And there was a story in New Brunswick about how our province was considering allowing companies to give them money to change the names of buildings and bridges, so it would be the Irving covered bridge, or, something like that. So they said they knew me and they knew my character, and that would be a good thing to write something about. So I know that I'm going to get paid a little bit of money, so I sit down and I write it, and then it becomes something that I can maybe or maybe not use in another show down the road. But I have a hard time writing something just for the sake of writing it. I've always had to be motivated by the fact that I have to write it, if you follow me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people are motivated by that. Book your gig in advance, and then you just have to perform. You have to.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, cool. So if you would have to think back about your career and think about maybe important advice that you've received, I know that not working for free would probably fit in there, but if you had to think about something else, what would you say is some of the best advice you've ever received?
Spend a lot of time thinking about the importance and working on it of getting along well with other people, up to and including people who are difficult to get along with. Don't be the one who is, and I've been there, I've certainly have had my moments of being a pain in the arse to other people. But if you're in an ensemble, spend a lot of time celebrating the potential and talent and contributions of the ensemble you're with. Like if you're a stand-up comedian, listen well to other stand-up comedians, support them, brainstorm with them about, how people are very protective of their material sometimes. Well, maybe someone who you really respect say, hey, I'm working on a bit here. Can I run it by you? Do you have time? You'd be surprised how forthcoming a lot of people will be with their support. So, one thing that's not taught in school And really, well, one thing we know is not taught in school, it should be, is humor. It's such a valuable tool, whether you do it professionally or not, but just basically how to get along with others and try to be the person who earns a reputation of being fairly easygoing and good to work with, and people will want to work with you.
Okay, cool. No, I think that's great advice. So like a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, I think is
there you go.
About that, right?
Yeah.
Is there any books that you've read that influenced your life?
They're everything from Catcher in the Rye, which was just such a seminal moment for me. But I tend to really like biographies, and I've read a lot of biographies of actors and people like Laurence Olivier I just read John Cleese's book and Robin Williams and Steve Martin and these people who have done the kind of things that we're talking about today, done it to an extreme, just to be able to hear about their stories and where they came from and how they, and you realize that good luck is a big part of things. It just happened to be there. I was going to be a lawyer, but then I was telling these jokes one day and a producer from the BBC heard them and said, come and do this. And I said, sure. And then all of a sudden I'm doing Monty Python, in the case of John Cleese, because you realize when you're trying to tell jokes and be funny that it's the real stuff that is by far the most bizarre and more interesting. Like every day something happens. If I, as a writer would try to make that up, people would think it's so far-fetched and unbelievable. It's like the Rob Ford thing, right? If you can, I'm going to write a play about a guy, he's a mayor, and he smokes crack, and he's a racist, and people, and of all places, Toronto, which is the most progressive, liberal, inclusive, multicultural city. This guy is the mayor, and it really happened. You couldn't make that up, right?
That is funny. That is really funny when you think about it. You look back, when you step back and you think about it. That is hilarious.
Yeah. So don't be afraid of the truth, and that's why I think in terms, it's pretty hard to say. There's certain books that are extremely well written that you just enjoy, but I tend towards biographies. Yeah.
Okay. So what would you say are your future plans? What's in the works, or what would you like to accomplish in the future?
Well, my future was decided for me when I graduated from school and made that decision that I talked about, to cast my stone in the water and say I would be a professional, is that I knew that I would never be, quote, retired. And, what does that mean? So the fact that I chose a profession that, getting back to what I said earlier, lots of people are very happy to do for free. In fact, a lot of people who work their lives in a job and say, well, when I retire, I want to do some amateur theater, whatever. So I'm going to continue, I think, in some form. I probably will move more into the writing. I don't know if I've got a novel in me, but I certainly have a couple of good plays that have been stirring around in there that I will eventually take the time and just organize myself. I'm really not as organized as I ought to be for a playwright. I have written all these plays, and I'm a member of the Playwrights Association, but I don't have them all cataloged and published. And they keep after me, like, where would send us your plays? So there's a lot of things like that I need to do. And as long as you're doing something that you continue to have so much fun in the creation of the work and get paid for it, I consider myself very privileged.
Great. Well, thank you. I want to thank you for your time to take to talk to the people who will want to listen to this. I think is very instructional in how you got your start, and it was an interesting conversation. So thank you, Marcel. And
okay, Marcel. Yeah,
I wish you a good success in all your future endeavors.
And I to you, bonne chance with everything there. Keep doing what you're doing, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking around till the end of my interview with Marcel Button. What I thought was the most interesting about my interview with Marcel was the concept of choosing to be a professional and getting paid for your art. I think it's a hard one for a lot of people because we just want the opportunities. We want the opportunities to perform, whether we get paid or not, and we see it as experience and exposure. So we tend to accept to do these things, even if we feel that we did work hard for what we prepared for these opportunities, and yet we still don't get compensated any way for it, except for just the fun of being able to practice our art. So choosing to only do work that you're going to get compensated for might put you in a situation where you now have to create your own work, right? You need to find the opportunities where you can get paid for your art, but that might be the place you want to be to make a living from your passion. What do you guys think? How much do you find that exposure is worth? So go on the website at hiredbypassion.com where you can leave a comment on the post or join our private Facebook group. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Thanks for listening to the Hired by Passion podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I would greatly appreciate a 5-star rating and review on iTunes.